I just want to say two things before I get into it. The first is, I was invited here as a representative of MSF, but if you will permit me, I will share some thoughts from the government perspective and also some personal reflections. So some of the things you see are not really MSF standard slide decks, but you'll get to hear some thoughts of mine, which I borrowed from some other people as well. And the second thing is, it's quite hard coming as the second speaker because you feel like you want to respond to some things in the first. And I would say this, I agree with much of what Fuk Kwang has said. I also believe to whom much has been given, much is required. And I believe that there is something to be said about we must respect every single individual, right? Every Singaporean is a unique individual. It's not just a Christian concept, but I think it's one that we would do well by if we accepted this as something that we must nurture, protect, espouse in our society. I would though rephrase his first question. His question was, can a country be economically competitive and generous in helping the poor and disadvantaged? I would change one word at least, and that is maybe I'll change generous to holistic. Meaning help effectively, help the whole person. And in some cases that means generous, and in some cases that means taking other approaches. Perhaps being generous not in terms of money, but in terms of time, and in terms of making sure that they're getting all the help that they need. So with that as a starting point, just a brief overview of our social compact. So Fuk Kwang says, from the early days, our circumstances have changed and our approach must change, and that's absolutely true. And actually it has changed over time, and I think it will continue to evolve. But in the early years, focus on survival with strong emphasis on self-reliance. I think he talked about that. In the 1990s, we started to get this stronger focus on the need for collective responsibility. And then in the last 10 years, actually even the language has changed. So PM called this the new way forward. And he said, today the situation has changed. If we rely too heavily on the individual, the efforts alone will not be enough, especially among the vulnerable, like the low-income families, like the elderly. And there are some things that they can't do on their own, and there are other things that we can do much better together. So we must shift the balance. The community and the government will have to do more to support individuals. And you've seen that change over time in some of even the whole support framework. And I'll talk about social service officers in a while, but just wanted to talk about what is our social compact as it stands today. The government creates the conditions for growth and opportunity. Individuals take personal responsibility where they can, with support from their families and the community. So the government provides a trampoline for those in need who can bounce back, and a social safety net for those who cannot. Now, we don't always articulate it quite as clearly, but I think we recognize that communicating this has been an issue, and that's why I think we need to actually articulate some of this. So it is not that you do not help people who are unable to help themselves and say, oh, it's all your own doing, right? You have to take care of your... No, and that's why there's a social safety net. Meaning, for those who are unable to work, the elderly, the physically disabled, the medically ill, actually, we have welfare, and it is there for life until they pass on, right? And then for others, we say, so I think DPM Taman was the one who came up with this word, trampoline, which I thought was quite apt. It's not just giving out handouts. It's about how do I give out hand-ups, right? How do I give you a hand so I can help you out? So that's the philosophy. So the whole of government approach to social assistance, we have multiple lines of assistance, allowing the government to extend assistance to households based on their needs in a more flexible and targeted manner. So what does this mean? This means we have many schemes. The same schemes that sometimes cause issues, right? As Fuk Kwang pointed out, it's so confusing, so much stuff on the ground, and are you actually covering all the ground? So actually, that is indeed a challenge. So I would agree that there's a challenge there. Now, is the approach then to have a single scheme? I don't think it'll work. And in fact, if we had a single scheme which is all comprehensive, then there's no need for the community, and there's no need for for family to come in. So I think that's the quandary that we face. And I think it's one of the things that I'll cover again, I'll come back to in a while. But we have schemes and policies in home ownership, in healthcare, in employment, in education, and for retirement. And then across the board, whatever cannot be, it is not sufficient between your own resources and what you're able to get from your own income, as well as the help that you get. There is ComCare, which is an endowment fund actually, but ComCare assistance, which cuts across to kind of shore up the gaps that remain. And this is another way to look at it. And if you say, oh, should it be that you have one scheme just for the low income and the disadvantaged? Well, that's not quite what is being done for good reasons, which I don't have time to fully go through now. But if you see this, we used to call it kueh lapis affectionately on the left, right? You see some schemes actually cut across. The high income get it too. It's universal. It's universal healthcare, subsidies, heavy subsidies, universal education across the board. And then you find, there are some other charges, maybe school charges, miscellaneous charges. You need to pay for textbooks. That's where you have another layer. And as I'll show in a short while, actually the out-of-pocket expenses can be very low for someone who's really in need. But here you see the entire kueh lapis because actually that we feel is a more targeted way to meet the actual needs that you have. So example one, childcare costs. I think not many people know full-day childcare can cost $3 per month after the subsidies for gross household income of not exceeding $2,500. Everybody gets a universal subsidy of $300, and then you have other subsidies on top of that. So actually, if you're poor, you pay $3. And why is it not zero? Because I think we believe in co-payment, right? There's this. It's quite an accepted concept. The notion of you put in something, even if it's small. So that's the idea. You can pay just $3. Example two, primary school education is free for all Singaporeans. Miscellaneous fees and other necessities can be fully covered by the MOE Financial Assistance Scheme if you don't have a household income that's exceeding $2,750. So you notice the numbers are different, which is what we feel is better than just having one threshold. Because if you have one threshold, you would benefit from one, not the other here, right? But you don't pay fees, you don't pay miscellaneous charges, you don't pay textbooks, you don't pay for your school attire if you're not able to afford it. So that's what's happening now. You see another case here. I won't go through the full case details, but here's a family in difficulty. At some point, the husband got sentenced to jail. This is a live case, by the way. I've just anonymized the case. So they get financial assistance from our short and medium term assistance, ComCare. They get MOE financial assistance, so they pay nothing per month for the two kids. They got childcare subsidies, they pay $6 per month per child. That probably means that they didn't go for the cheapest operator, right? But they're paying $6 a month. And FSC was helping with the student care issues in March, and now that has been settled, and they're paying zero for the student care. So for the really low income and disadvantaged, actually these schemes allow you to pay in often close to nothing. So what do we have? As I said, ComCare is a trampoline, temporary financial support for those who need to leg up for a time, and it's a safety net for those who are unable to support themselves in the longer term. Between 2013 and 2015, 24 social service officers, which are under my group, were set up island-wide to provide better access to social assistance. We publish a ComCare annual report every year, and you can see that since it was set up, the ComCare payouts have been increasing. Actually, to the point where it's exceeded the endowment interest, and MSF then comes in and just tops it up with our own budget. Now, is that good or is that bad? Actually, it's good if you find that a lot of people who didn't get easy access to the help that they genuinely need are getting it. And now it's starting to taper off. And what we're starting to watch is, okay, over time, do we see repeat households? That's what we're concerned about. But it's too short a time frame to really draw any conclusions. But the SSOs have two functions. One is to give out ComCare, to assess the need for financial assistance, and the other is to be a node in the community to help with services planning. And they work with the family service centers, the disability providers, services providers, and they make sense on the ground, and they make make friends and partners, and they coordinate services. But yet, we think there's scope to do more. And that's why recognizing that the last mile, some clients, some low-income individuals, some disadvantaged individuals, some people in need can still fall through the cracks. The system can work, but sometimes you need that last mile bridging, and you need someone to really catch things so that it doesn't perpetuate. And this is a small minority for the most part. That I have to say. Every year we give out Comcare to 30,000 families, households, and 80,000 individuals. Right? Okay. And here, you see, we are trying to strengthen it so that clients can get better coordination, government can make better use of resources, and the community can better support these efforts. And here are the 5 thrusts. I think I'll just let you read this because it'll save some time. But making it easier for people, really. Integrated service delivery, coordinating our actions better, making sure they get the help they need. And all this is part of SG Cares. So this, hope you have heard, at least some of you have heard about it. Need to care for meaningful opportunities for a supportive environment. And I'll come back to why this is important. How well have we done? I mean, on many counts, we've done well, right? So here you see a bunch of measures: literacy rates, economic growth, unemployment rates are very low. But of course, we're not just about economics. So if we look at some other measures, we are apparently the 2nd happiest country in Asia, 34th in the world. We are the top, the safest country, according to the Law and Order Index. And we are joint first for top places for children to grow up in. So at least one survey. Of course, all these surveys, you know, it depends on methodology and all that. But I mean, by international measures, at least some international measures, we're not doing too bad, even on the non-economic front. But as we look ahead, the question is, what will our society become going forward? And so let's take a look at some of the drivers that will shape this outcome. Aging society, I think I don't need to spend too much time on this. Everybody knows our society is aging. The economic and employment outlook. This will have implications on financial adequacy, employment, the ability of even the low income and disadvantaged, but not just that, even the middle class, how well they will be able to find jobs that suit them, match their skills. Will we have the skill sets? That's something that will shape outcomes. Strength of families. The word parent, you know, as in I'm parenting, you know, this as a verb was only a pretty recent phenomenon. You don't say I'm grandfathering someone, I'm cousining someone, I'm brothering someone, I'm sistering someone. You don't say that. And it didn't used to be that way, but it's only in more recent decades where you see people actually getting married and moving away from home. And then the strength of the family starts to get affected, all right, potentially, at least it's at higher risk. So some of this, we have to keep watching this. What's the strength of families? What's the strength of our community? Will people step up? And that's why it's very heartening to see people like you who are taking the time actually to see what can the community do. And the last one is national values. This is not a comprehensive list, but I think this is actually very important. National values, are we self-centered or are we more other-centered? And here, I'm borrowing from, there's this essay called The Fate of Empires by Sir John Glubb, and this was discussed by Lim Seong-Guan and Joanne Lim in that book, Winning with Honor in 2016. And it talks about the 7 stages that empires or states go through. And the average lifespan turns out to only be about 250 years. Why? Because there were certain things that happened, but actually they all followed the same stages. It's not definitive, but it's just a point of reference for us. And my ex-boss, Mr. Benny Lim, said, generally speaking, in the first 2 decades of independence, nation building was prioritized, but in the last 3 decades, with political stability and order, our priorities on nation building seem to have taken a backseat. And I think this is something we have to watch out for. Because if you look at some of the characteristics of the age of decadence, the second last, defensiveness, pessimism, materialism, frivolity, and influx of foreigners. Interestingly enough, 6th one is the welfare state and weakening of religion. These are signposts that perhaps we need to watch out for. and then after that is decline. Money causes nations and empires to rise, and money and wealth could cause nations and empires to fail. So what are our current national values? So here's a survey of national values. You see personal values, same survey. Personal values, individuals say family, responsibility, friendship, happiness, etc. And then you see, what is Singapore society like today? What do you think societal values are? Kiasu, competitive, materialistic, kiasi, self-centered. But it's the same group of people. You know, individuals make up society. What's happening? And you say, what is it that they want? Affordable housing, caring for the elderly, effective healthcare, etc. So this is one source of reference, right? One point of reference for us in terms of what do people want. But here's another point of reference, our Singapore conversation. We also talked about a society with diverse definitions of success. Strong and vibrant economy, but a society that takes care of the disadvantaged as well, greater sense of togetherness, all the stuff that actually Foucault talked about, which I agree with, right? But this is what people want, so where are we? And how do we get there? I think here, from the government standpoint, is some of the quandaries and dilemmas that we face. How much should the government do without diminishing individual resilience and without crowding out family and community support? What we found is sometimes government moves in, community stays. Well, I won't do it since it wasn't important enough for government to fund it, right? Or since government is doing, I won't do it. Family, we are seeing more with the increasing accessibility of social assistance. Some families say, I don't want to trouble my kids. Please don't approach my kids. Right, just give me the financial assistance. That's what we see. Okay, how can we help in a way that does not inadvertently harm the individual? We know that there's a bandwidth tax. Too much on your minds, if we make it too difficult, it actually erodes the ability of the individuals to function well and get themselves into problem-solving mode. But if you give too much, what we also find is that sometimes it erodes the incentive. We do have cases where, you know, it's like, well, just give me. And say, why aren't you even trying to find a job? Just give me. Right? So in practice, you're going to find there's a whole spectrum of Singaporeans. And the question is, too much is, you know, too much, and too little can be too little. What is the right amount? That's the Goldilocks principle, right? What's just right? Labeling effects. One of the reasons why we don't want to have we don't say a poor a lot of times, because it's well established in cognitive psychology. Once I call you poor, your effective IQ when you problem solve goes down. So the more I talk about this in those terms and I label you, instead of seeing you as a holistic individual, the more I hurt you. So that's some of the quandaries that we are facing. Last two slides. Are we a wealthy nation? Well, in GDP terms, certainly. Singapore has far more assets, however, than has been captured by economic measures. This was a book written by David Halpern, The Hidden Wealth of Nations. He studied a whole bunch of nations. He used to be the CEO of the Nudge Unit in Britain. And so he's made these observations. Every nation has a hidden wealth in its citizens' character, well-being, and relationships. And a society of trustworthy citizens is a platform for both economic growth and well-being. He illustrates some of it, but that's what he finds. The richer you are, the happier you are as a nation to a point. And then beyond the point, if that held true, if I just give money and that makes people happier, actually I would want to see that, you know, I would expect to see that it continues in terms of my happiness, but that's not what happens. So what is it? Actually, a hidden wealth of the nation is the people. Question for us, are we becoming more or less wealthy as a nation? So what do we want for Singapore? What can we as individuals and as a community do to build up our hidden wealth for ourselves, our children, and our nation? Thank you.